The ballroom of the Grand Plaza Hotel was the kind of place built for people who enjoyed pretending they were royalty. The chandeliers sparkled like galaxies trapped in glass. The marble floors looked polished enough to see your sins in, and the air conditioning was set so low it felt like the hotel was trying to preserve the guests like museum artifacts. But underneath all that glitter and cold glamour, beneath the gold linen tablecloths and the expensive perfume, there was something else simmering through the cracks. Insecurity wearing a tuxedo. And on that day, my daughter's wedding day, I could feel it more than anyone else in the room. I stood near the back, close to the side entrance where staff carried trays of champagne flutes and tiny appetizers no bigger than a thumbnail. It was the kind of food rich people pretended to enjoy, but I'd lived long enough to know they went home hungry and ordered greasy takeout. My suit, an old charcoal gray wool blend from the 1990s, felt thick and heavy on my shoulders. It smelled faintly of cedar and mothballs, but it was the one piece of clothing that had traveled with me through 2 decades of triumph, grief, and quiet disappearance. I wore it today not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because it reminded me of who I used to be. My name is Reginald King, 70 years old, founder of King Logistics, builder of an empire people pretend simply sprouted out of the soil like a miracle. But I didn't come here today as Reginald King. Today, everyone simply saw me as Reggie, the quiet old man who lived in a wooden cabin at the edge of town and drove a truck that coughed smoke like it had emphysema. A man who, according to neighborhood gossip, used to be something but probably lost everything. Funny how people fill in blanks when you don't offer your own story. My daughter Naya was the only thing shining brighter than the chandeliers. She looked beautiful, radiant even, in a gown covered in shimmering beads, the kind of dress that took 3 people to zip up and cost more than my first house did. Her makeup was flawless, her hair sculpted into curls that framed her face softly, yet there was something in her eyes that didn't belong on a bride, fear, or maybe embarrassment. Every so often she glanced at me, a quick dart of her eyes, and then looked away as if hoping no one else noticed she was acknowledging the old man in the faded suit. It hurt, but pain is something I'm used to. Life had sharpened me long before she was born. The groom, Preston Sterling, was the opposite of quiet. He stood in the center of the ballroom like he believed the world spun around him. He wore an obnoxiously bright white tuxedo, the kind that practically screamed, "Look at me!" Even his cufflinks sparkled like they were auditioning for their own spotlight. He held a glass of champagne in one hand, laughing loudly at jokes no one else found funny, talking, just a bit too loudly, slapping backs just a bit too hard. Everything about him was exaggerated. His smile, his confidence, his ego, and all of it built on credit. I knew that much. I had spent 40 years building a billion-dollar corporation, and it didn't take much for me to sniff out when someone was faking wealth. Preston lived loud, fast, and shallow, the kind of man who leased sports cars but couldn't afford the insurance, who bought designer suits but hid the tags so he could return them, who threw extravagant parties while drowning in debt. I didn't dislike him for being poor. I grew up with nothing. I disliked him for pretending he was better than everyone else, including me. From across the ballroom, Preston spotted me. His smile widened, but not in a kind way. It was the smile of a man who had found something to mock. "Reggie!" he yelled, waving his arm as if summoning his servant, not greeting family. "Come here!" I didn't move at first. My knees had begun aching from standing, a small reminder of the years I spent lifting cargo crates before I owned the trucks they went into. The ache traveled through me, grounding me, reminding me that everything I had ever built came from sweat and work, not arrogance. Finally, I stepped forward. The guests parted a little, not because I commanded respect, but because they didn't want my old suit brushing against them. As I approached the VIP table, I immediately recognized the man sitting at its center, Mr. Gregory Henderson, CEO of King Logistics, the man I hired 20 years ago, the man I had trained, the man who now ran my empire while I lived like a ghost. He hadn't seen me in 5 years, not since I left the company without fanfare, choosing peace over power. I didn't announce retirement. I simply stepped back and disappeared. And though Henderson tried to contact me, I ignored every call. I wanted my life back, I wanted to be more than the empire I built. But today, fate had decided my disappearance had lasted long enough. Preston slung a heavy arm around my shoulders the moment I reached the table, squeezing me like he wanted to bruise bone. "Mr. Henderson," Preston said eagerly, "I want to introduce you to my father-in-law. This is Reggie." He said my name like it tasted sour. Henderson looked up from his plate, a perfect medium-rare steak I recognized from countless boardroom dinners, and squinted at me, his brow furrowed. There was recognition forming, but the beard I'd grown and the weight I'd lost over the years blurred the memories. Preston didn't give him time to speak. "Reggie is, well, he's a character," Preston said, chuckling. "Lives out in the sticks. Been unemployed for years. We invited him out of pity, honestly." Naya insisted. A few people at the table laughed politely. I felt my daughter's eyes burning into the floor. My heart didn't break, it calcified. I stood motionless, letting Preston continue. "Drove here in a truck that sounds like a lawnmower," he added, laughing louder. "He's harmless, though, just simple." The irony of the moment was almost painful. The man who lived off my legacy, mocking me, to the man whose entire career existed because I built a throne for him to sit on. Henderson's face had gone pale. His eyes scanned my suit, my face, then the ring on my right hand, a ring identical to the one he wore, a ring I had given him myself the day King Logistics reached its first billion-dollar revenue year. His hand shook. He whispered, "Reginald." "King?" Preston burst into laughter. "Come on, sir," he said dismissively. "You think this guy is the Reginald King? Look at him." I didn't say anything. Silence is a weapon when used correctly. I reached up and adjusted my tie. Using a knot only two people in this room knew how to tie. The knot I taught Henderson the night before he became CEO. The signal, the command. Henderson rose from his seat so fast his chair screamed across the marble floor, cutting through the conversations around us. The room froze. "Mr. Sterling," Henderson said, voice sharp and cold. Preston straightened up, expecting praise. "Yes, sir?" "You just called this man an unemployed loser," Henderson said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Preston smirked. "Just a joke, sir." "It is not a joke to me," Henderson replied, "and it will never be a joke again." The color drained from Preston's face. "This man," Henderson continued, eyes locked on me, "is the reason you have a job. He is the founder of King Logistics." A stillness fell over the room. Guests turned, cameras lifted, whispers became storms. And then Henderson delivered the blow. "Mr. Sterling, you are fired!" The word exploded through the ballroom like a gunshot. Preston blinked hard, swaying slightly as if his world had just been ripped out from under him. "Fired?" he stuttered. "Today? At my wedding?" "You are a liability," Henderson said flatly. "A disrespectful, arrogant liability." Naya gasped, the champagne flute slipping from her fingers and shattering on the floor. Preston looked around wildly, a trapped animal. Then his eyes landed on me. "You," he snarled. "You did this, you old fool." He lunged. Security moved fast. Henderson must have signaled them, grabbing him before he could touch me. As they restrained him, Preston struggled desperately, rage turning his face purple. "You ruined my life," he screamed. "You!" I reached out, took a glass of red wine from a passing waiter, lifted it to my lips, and took a slow sip. "This wine is sour," I said calmly, loud enough for him to hear. "Just like your manners." They began. Room erupted, some in shock, some in awe, some in shame for ever having laughed at Preston's jokes. And with that, everything began to unravel. For Preston, for Naya, for the illusion of a perfect wedding, for the masks everyone had worn that night, and for the first time in years, I stepped out of the shadows. The sound of Preston's rage still echoed through the ballroom long after the security guards dragged him toward the exit, but the silence that followed struck harder than any scream he could have thrown. For a moment, it felt as though the entire hotel had stopped breathing. Even the chandeliers seemed frozen mid-sparkle, as if the electricity inside them had paused, unwilling to interrupt what had just unfolded. My daughter's wedding, an event planned with absurd precision, decorated with flowers imported from 3 different countries, catered by chefs who charged more per plate than I once earned in a week, had collapsed into a spectacle. A performance no one expected, yet no one could look away from. The moment Preston disappeared through the towering doors, shoved by 2 muscular security guards wearing earpieces and matching frowns, the ballroom began to murmur. Conversations ignited like sparks catching in dry grass. Some guests whispered behind gloved hands. Others leaned in so close to their partners, their foreheads nearly touched. The orchestra, unsure of whether to resume the scheduled piece, sat motionless with their bows hovering above the strings. The entire room had seen the mask rip off, and now they were staring at the man Preston tried to humiliate. Me. I stood still, letting the storm settle, letting the weight of recognition gradually shift from confusion to awe. People who had barely acknowledged me earlier now gazed at me with entirely different eyes. Eyes filled with curiosity, guilt, or sudden respect. Funny how quickly perception changes once someone learns the thing they thought was worthless is, in fact, priceless. My daughter, meanwhile, looked like she had forgotten how to breathe. Nia stumbled toward me, her white heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. The glitter around her eyes had smeared from tears, making her look younger, more fragile, like the child who used to run to me after every scraped knee. "Dad," she whispered, "what just happened?" I didn't answer immediately. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw fear, confusion, heartbreak, and something deeper lurking beneath the surface. Shame. Not the shame of a daughter embarrassed by her father's old suit or rusty truck, but the shame of someone who finally realized she had been standing on the wrong side all along. Before I could speak, Henderson stepped forward, not rushed, not timid, with purpose. The same man who had been CEO for years, commanding rooms full of executives, now approached me with the cautious reverence of a man approaching a king. He straightened his tie, cleared his throat, and bowed his head. Not deeply, but enough to convey respect that no audience could ignore. "Mr. King," he said, voice quiet but steady, I should have recognized you earlier." Now the whispers grew louder. People leaned closer, tasting the words, rolling them across their tongues. "Mr. King, Mr. King, Reginald King, the founder, the real owner." A strange mix of pride and sadness pulled in my chest. I gave him a small nod, the gesture minimal but powerful enough to send a ripple through the surrounding crowd. Some guests gasped softly, others straightened their backs. A few even clutched their pearls or adjusted their suits, suddenly worried about their manners, their words, their previous laughter at Preston's insults. "When you adjusted your tie," Henderson continued softly, "I knew." "That knot," I said, "took you a week to learn." He laughed nervously. "I remember. You told me I'd never lead a company if I couldn't tie a tie properly." "And you proved me wrong," I replied. "You led the company well." It was true. Henderson had carried King Logistics through the expansions I had laid the foundations for. He was loyal, sharp, and dependable, all the qualities Preston lacked. Nia stood silently beside me, tears filling her eyes. Her hand trembled as she reached for mine, but quickly pulled back as if unsure whether she had the right. I turned to her. "It's all right," I said. She let out a breath she'd been holding too long and threw her arms around me. Her body shook as she pressed her face against my shoulder. "I didn't know," she whispered. "Dad, I would never. I didn't know who you really were." Her words stung, but not in the way she feared. They stung because they revealed who she had become, someone who treated people based on their appearance, not their heart. "Nia," I said gently, "you should have respected me even if I was just a man in a cabin." She froze, her hands tightening into fists against my suit. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." I stroked her hair lightly, the same way I did when she was little, and climbed into my lap after a nightmare. "I know," I said, "but you need to learn from this." She stepped back, wiping tears from her cheeks. Her makeup smeared slightly, but she looked real. More real than she had in months. Around us, guests drifted closer, unsure whether they should approach or flee. The wedding planner stood near the buffet table, pale as a ghost, clutching her clipboard like a life vest. The officiant avoided eye contact entirely. Three bridesmaids whispered frantic theories among themselves, each one more ridiculous than the last. I heard one of them hiss, "See, I told you he looked expensive, mysterious." Another replied, "I thought he was a gardener." Meanwhile, Preston's parents stood stiffly near the corner, their faces a blend of horror, disbelief, and poorly disguised anger. Mrs. Sterling's lips pressed together so tightly they nearly disappeared. Mr. Sterling's hands clenched at his sides as if trying to physically restrain himself from marching back into the room to defend his son. But they didn't dare, not after witnessing the power shift. And then, someone approached. A middle-aged man in a navy blue suit, someone I vaguely recognized from the days when I still attended shareholder meetings. He looked nervous as he stepped closer. "Mr. King," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "it's an honor to finally meet you. I apologize for earlier. I didn't realize." I held up a hand to stop him. "You don't need to apologize for not recognizing me," I said. "I didn't come here to be recognized." He swallowed hard. Still, what Preston said was out of line. "It was," I replied, "but he revealed more about himself than about me." The man nodded, humbled. One by one, more people followed. Some offered congratulations. Others apologized. A few simply stared with admiration, as though I were some ancient artifact dug up from the earth, a relic of power. But I'd had enough of the attention. I lifted my hand gently, telling them without words that I needed space. Gradually, the crowd dispersed. Henderson remained beside me. "Sir," he said quietly, "what would you like me to do? I can make a statement to the staff. I can manage the fallout. Or, if you want, I can escort you out discreetly." His loyalty had always been his strength, but I wasn't hiding anymore. "No," I said firmly. "I'm staying. My daughter deserves to understand everything before this night is over." Nia took a shaky breath. "Dad, can we talk? Alone?" I nodded. We moved toward the far end of the ballroom, away from the ears and eyes of gossip-hungry guests. The lights shimmered above us, casting reflections that danced across the polished floor like tiny stars fallen from the sky. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice raw. "Why did you let me believe you were struggling? Why did you live in that cabin when you could have been—" "I could have been wealthy," I finished. She nodded. "I didn't want wealth," I said slowly. "Money didn't matter after your mother died. Peace mattered. Silence mattered. I built that company for 40 years, Naya. 40 years of boardrooms and deadlines and airports and sleepless nights. When you chase success for too long, you forget who you are." Her lip trembled. "I wanted you to live your own life," I continued. "I didn't want my success to overshadow your choices. I didn't want you to choose friends or partners based on my last name. But I didn't choose right," she whispered, breaking again. "I chose Preston because I thought he was confident, successful. I thought he'd give me a good life, and I didn't want to bring you around because I thought you might embarrass him." There it was, the truth behind her shame. I let the words settle, painful but necessary. "Nia," I said quietly, "if a man cannot respect your father, he will never respect you." She covered her face with her hands, sobbing softly. "And if a man feels the need to belittle others to feel powerful," I added, "he was never powerful to begin with." She lowered her hands, eyes swollen, but clear now. "I want to fix this," she said. "I want to make things right. I don't want to be that person anymore." "You can change," I replied, "but you need to choose better. And that starts with walking away from the man who revealed his soul tonight." She nodded slowly, the weight of the decision sinking into her bones. As she wiped her eyes again, Henderson approached cautiously. "Mr. King," he said, "I've informed staff to handle Preston quietly outside. He's still shouting." I sighed. Of course he was. "Let him shout," I said. "A man who screams in humiliation will always blame others. It's easier than accepting truth." "The crowd is waiting," and Henderson continued. "They're unsure whether the ceremony can proceed." "The ceremony is over," I said, "and there is no marriage happening tonight." Naya didn't argue. A finality settled over her shoulders. Heavy, but freeing. The ballroom doors opened again and two guards returned, clearly exhausted. One whispered something to the wedding planner, who promptly fainted against a table laden with shrimp cocktails. Chaos, still rippling. And that's when one unexpected sound broke through the tension. Applause. Slow, uncertain at first, a few claps from the back of the room, then more and more, until the entire ballroom began to applaud, not out of celebration, but out of respect. Respect for truth, respect for dignity, respect for the quiet man who stood strong when insulted. I didn't acknowledge it. Applause is for performers, not for men who simply refuse to bow. But Naya looked at me with new eyes. Eyes that understood something she had forgotten long ago. Her father wasn't a loser. He wasn't a burden. He wasn't a charity case. He was a king. And tonight the world had remembered his name. The echoes of the broken champagne glass were still vibrating through the ballroom when I finally allowed myself to breathe. The sharp shattering seemed almost symbolic, a crack in the illusion Preston had so carefully built. For months, if not years, he had curated a life of lies. The penthouse apartment, the rented sports cars, the expensive suits, the flamboyant lifestyle, all carefully calculated to impress strangers and inflate his own sense of importance. But tonight all of it lay in pieces, much like the glass on the floor. Nia still clung to my arm, her small hand trembling in mine. She looked up at me with eyes that finally reflected truth, rather than the filtered version of life she had been living. There was guilt there, yes, but also a newfound clarity. She saw me for who I really was, and perhaps, for the first time in her life, she understood the difference between true power and superficial wealth. I, I don't know what to say, she whispered, her voice shaking. I can't believe I let him humiliate you like that. I squeezed her hand gently. It's not about what he did, Nia. It's about what he revealed. He showed his true character, and that's all we need to know. Sometimes people show you who they are. You just have to pay attention. Her lips quivered. I'm so ashamed, and angry, and scared. I nodded, silently acknowledging the complicated cocktail of emotions a daughter feels when the illusion she's been living in crumbles in front of her eyes. Good, let that anger remind you. Fear will teach you caution, and shame, well, shame will teach you discernment. Henderson stayed a respectful distance away, though I could feel his eyes scanning the ballroom, ensuring that the chaos was under control. Even he, the CEO of a billion-dollar empire, could not ignore the sheer audacity of the scene we had just created. Preston Sterling, the man who had strutted around like royalty, was now a blubbering caricature, restrained by two burly security guards who had already begun escorting him toward the exit. The whispers had started again, this time tinged with admiration. Guests who had previously laughed at Preston's joke now stared at me, their expressions shifting from curiosity to awe. The old man in the mothball-scented suit had become the center of attention, not for wealth, but for power. Real power. Nia finally released my arm and took a small step back, wiping her tears with the edge of her sleeve. Dad, what happens now? She asked softly. I looked around the ballroom. The servers were frozen mid-step, the orchestra uncertain whether to continue playing, and guests were whispering feverishly among themselves. Even the photographers were snapping pictures with wide-eyed astonishment, realizing that this wasn't just another wedding. This was a spectacle, one that would be remembered long after the confetti settled. What happens now? I repeated, my voice calm but carrying weight. Now we deal with the truth. The wedding as it was planned is over. Preston showed everyone who he really is, and that truth cannot be ignored. You have a choice, Nia. You can walk away, or you can cling to illusions. Her lip trembled again. I need time. I nodded. Good. Take the time. Understand that respect and loyalty matter, more than grandeur and spectacle. Never let anyone, not even someone you love, make you forget that. Just then, Henderson approached again. Sir, he said quietly, I've spoken to security. Preston is being removed discreetly. The staff is handling the cleanup, and the guests are starting to calm down. But there's something you should know. I raised an eyebrow. Go on. He called several people on his phone before he was escorted out, Henderson said. His family, business associates, He's trying to spin this, make it seem like, I don't know, that you're the problem. I allowed myself a small smile. Of course he is. That's what fools do. They blame others for the consequences of their own arrogance. Henderson nodded slowly. What do you want me to do, Go? I looked across the ballroom at my daughter, still standing near the edge of the chaos, and then at the remaining guests, who were now murmuring nervously among themselves. Let it play out naturally, I said. People will see the truth on their own. Preston can scream, beg, or lie all he wants. The truth has already been revealed. His reputation is in pieces. Henderson hesitated, clearly impressed by the simplicity and effectiveness of my response. Yes, sir, he said quietly. Understood. I turned back to Naya. Do you understand why I didn't intervene earlier? I asked. She nodded slowly. I let him humiliate me because that moment would expose him to everyone. It would remove the mask he wears around others and show who he truly is. Some lessons can only be learned through experience. Her hands trembled as she touched my arm again. I understand now, Dad. I understand more than I ever have, but it hurts. It hurts so much to see him like that. Good, I said softly. Let it hurt. Pain is a teacher, and tonight it has taught you one of life's most valuable lessons. Respect is earned, not bought, and deceit always carries a price. The room had begun to settle, though the tension lingered like the aftertaste of a strong drink. Guests whispered to one another, eyes darting to me and then back to Nia. Cameras clicked incessantly, capturing the expressions of shock, awe, and newfound respect. The silence, once deafening, had transformed into a sort of reverent acknowledgement. And then, just as the murmurs began to die down, I noticed Preston's parents approaching from the corner, their expressions pale and rigid. They stopped a few feet away, unsure whether to intervene or flee. The realization had finally struck them. Their son's carefully constructed facade had crumbled before the entire wedding guest list. His life, built on lies and illusions, was exposed for everyone to see. Mrs. Sterling's voice trembled as she spoke. Reginald, we didn't know. I raised a hand gently, not in anger but in warning. Do not attempt to defend him. This is not about punishment or revenge. This is about truth. He revealed himself, and now the consequences follow naturally. Mr. Sterling swallowed hard, his face pale. But it's his wedding day, which he squandered, I said, by insulting me and revealing his own character. His day, his choice, the outcome is of his own making. The weight of those words seemed to crush them. They realized that no pleading, no explanation, no justification could repair what had been revealed. Naya stepped forward, her eyes blazing with a mixture of pain, anger, and clarity. You're not welcome here, she said firmly. Not tonight, not ever again. You have shown who you are. Her words were simple, but they carried the authority of someone who had just stepped into adulthood. Someone who finally understood the value of truth, respect, and self-worth. Preston's parents faltered, realizing there was no room for argument. They slowly retreated, leaving the ballroom in stunned silence once more. The remaining guests shifted uncomfortably, now fully aware of the dynamics at play and the consequences of arrogance and deceit. Henderson stepped beside me, his expression one of quiet admiration. Sir, the way you handled this, it's remarkable, he said. You didn't yell, you didn't threaten, and yet Preston's entire world crumbled with a single look from you. I allowed myself a small smile. Years of experience teach you how to handle fools. Sometimes silence is louder than words. Sometimes patience is more powerful than anger. And sometimes allowing people to reveal themselves is the best lesson they can ever receive. The orchestra finally resumed, hesitant at first, then gaining confidence as the guests slowly returned to their seats. The music filled the room, though it was tinged with a strange melancholy, a reminder that no celebration could fully mask the truth that had been revealed. I glanced at Naya, her tears dried, her posture straightening with newfound resolve. She had learned a hard lesson tonight about deception, respect, and the importance of seeing people for who they truly are. And perhaps for the first time, She understood the full measure of her father's wisdom and strength. The chaos had passed, but its echoes would linger for a long time. Preston's life, carefully constructed on lies and arrogance, was now exposed. And for the rest of the guests, a powerful reminder had been delivered. True power is not in wealth, appearances, or status. It is in character, integrity, and the ability to stand unshaken in the face of arrogance. I took a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the weight of the night settle over me. The world had shifted in those few moments of revelation. Preston's mask was gone. Naya had grown. And I had finally allowed the truth to be seen. And that, I realized, was far more satisfying than any fortune or title I had ever held. The aftermath of Preston's public disgrace didn't settle immediately. It reverberated through the Grand Plaza Hotel like a storm that had just passed, but left debris scattered everywhere. The shattered glass from Naya's champagne flute glistened across the marble floor, tiny shards reflecting the chandeliers above like fractured stars. It was a perfect metaphor for the night. Lives fractured, illusions broken, and the truth shining where everyone least expected it. Nia sat at the edge of the VIP table, hands folded in her lap, her once perfect gown slightly rumpled, still smelling faintly of roses and expensive perfume. Her eyes, bloodshot from crying, looked distant but thoughtful, as though she were seeing the entire world differently for the first time. She had learned, painfully and publicly, that wealth and appearances were shallow measures of worth, and that character could never be faked. I moved closer, keeping my steps measured and deliberate. Every click of my shoes against the marble floor seemed amplified in the stunned silence that had settled over the room. Guests watched every movement, trying to anticipate my next words, as if I were some mythical figure whose decisions could shape destinies. In truth, I felt no desire for drama. I only wanted clarity, for my daughter, for the room, and inadvertently, for myself. Nia, I said gently, kneeling slightly so my eyes met hers. Tonight you've seen what happens when arrogance, deception, and disrespect collide. Remember this. Remember the fear you felt in this room. Remember the betrayal. And remember that a person's true self always reveals itself in time. She nodded slowly, swallowing hard. I do, Dad. I'll never forget. But what happens to him now? Her voice was quiet but carried a weight, the curiosity of someone witnessing ruin firsthand. I gave a soft exhale. Preston's actions have consequences. He humiliated you, he humiliated me, and he embarrassed every person who trusted him. Reputation, once lost, is nearly impossible to regain. People will remember this night for a long time. That's life, and that is justice in its simplest form. Henderson approached quietly, standing just behind us. Even after years of leading a billion-dollar company, he seemed almost deferential tonight, like a general standing behind the captain who taught him strategy. Sir, he said, the staff has secured the ballroom, and most of the guests are calming down. Some are still shocked. Others are already speaking about what they saw. It's unprecedented. I allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to appear. Good, let them talk. Truth travels faster than rumor when it has weight behind it. Let Preston's foolishness speak for itself. Henderson hesitated before asking, and, Naya, what will you do with her wedding? I glanced across the ballroom, taking in the remnants of chaos, the toppled floral arrangements, the crumpled table linens, the unsettled orchestra. Guests were whispering in corners, some clearly struggling to reconcile what they had witnessed with the celebratory atmosphere they expected. The wedding, as it was planned, was over. It could not continue under the shadow of Preston's public exposure. She needs time, I said softly, my voice carrying both authority and empathy. She needs to understand that a marriage begins with respect, and right now, respect has been violated beyond repair. Tonight is not the end of her story, but it is the end of the illusion she has been living under. Nia's lips trembled, and for a moment she looked at me with a mix of fear and admiration. I understand, Dad. I don't know what to say. I feel free somehow. Freedom, I said, comes when you see reality clearly. Sometimes the pain is sharp, but it is necessary. You have been given a rare gift tonight, clarity. Use it wisely. The wedding planner approached nervously, her hands shaking as she held her clipboard like a lifeline. Mr. King, sir, the guests they're asking questions. Some want to know what happens next. Others are asking if the wedding continues. I shook my head slowly. The wedding does not continue. A marriage built on lies is no marriage at all. But the guests will leave with a lesson, whether they realize it or not. That is enough for now. She nodded, looking both relieved and terrified at the same time, and scurried away to manage the flustered servers and anxious caterers. I turned my attention back to Nia. Your life will continue, I said, and you will have to make choices, as you always have. But never again will you choose someone who disrespects the foundation of your family. Remember, character is the truest form of wealth. Everything else is an illusion. She swallowed hard, nodding, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I understand. I never want to feel small like that again. You won't, Iso, I said. Not if you remember tonight. Preston's arrogance revealed him for what he is. Let his failure be your guide. Learn from it. Grow from it. And don't let appearances deceive you again. Henderson watched quietly, the respect in his eyes evident. Sir, may I speak freely? Of course, Mawan said. You have changed the trajectory of this evening, this family, and perhaps even this company in ways Preston will never understand. What you've done isn't just discipline or correction. It's a lesson in leadership, integrity, and restraint. Watching you tonight, it reminded me of the man who built this company from nothing, the man I aspire to honor every day. I nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and nostalgia. Leadership is not about wealth or power, I said quietly. It is about honesty, consistency, and the courage to face what others refuse to see. Preston lacked courage, Nia witnessed it firsthand, and Henderson, you carry it forward. That is the legacy of King Logistics. The guests continued to murmur, some approaching cautiously, others still staring from afar. Cameras clicked, capturing moments that would likely circulate far beyond the hotel walls. The reality of the night was now undeniable. Preston's downfall was complete. Nia's eyes had opened to the truth, and the man in the mothball-scented suit, the quiet, seemingly ordinary father, had revealed himself to be the force behind the empire everyone had underestimated. A hush fell over the room when a waiter accidentally dropped a tray, shattering crystal glasses onto the marble. For a heartbeat, the noise seemed symbolic, almost poetic, the shattering of illusions and the sudden clarity that comes with destruction. I inhaled deeply, letting the silence wash over me. The truth had been delivered. No theatrics were necessary, no speeches needed. Preston's own arrogance had ensured his downfall. I glanced once more at Nia, now composed but solemn. Tonight will stay with you, I said. Remember the lessons, the consequences, and the clarity. These moments shape us more than any celebration ever could. She nodded, understanding far more than I could express. For the first time, she truly saw the difference between real power and pretense. Outside, security led Preston away. His shouting could still be heard faintly through the thick doors, a reminder that even arrogance cannot escape accountability. Inside, the remnants of the celebration, half-empty glasses, toppled chairs, and whispers of astonishment, bore witness to the truth that had been revealed. I stood tall, observing everything. The stunned guests, the quieted orchestra, the shocked wedding party. The room felt smaller now, as though the weight of honesty had condensed the space around us. And in that compact silence, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. The satisfaction of seeing justice served without malice, simply through patience, observation, and timing. Henderson, I said, my voice low but steady, ensure Preston is removed from all company events. He has shown his true character, and it will not represent the values we hold. Let this be a lesson to all who underestimate others. Yes, sir, Henderson replied, his tone reverent. I finally allowed myself to step away from the center of the room, moving closer to Nia. Come, I said, let's leave this place for now. There is work to do, lessons to reflect on, and a life to rebuild, without deception, without lies, and without arrogance. She took my arm once more, this time firmly and without hesitation. Together we moved through the remnants of the ruined celebration, past guests whose expressions ranged from awe to disbelief, and into the quiet hallway that led away from the ballroom. The night had been long, the truths had been harsh, and the lessons unforgettable. As the doors closed behind us, leaving the shattered glass and whispers behind, I realized something profound. Sometimes the most devastating events reveal not loss, but clarity. Preston had revealed his character. Naya had glimpsed the depth of truth, and I, Reginald King, had once again reminded the world, and myself, that true power is invisible to the untrained eye, and respect is earned, never demanded. Tonight the storm had passed, but the ripples would last a lifetime. And in those ripples, the seeds of wisdom, clarity, and justice had already been sown. The hotel was quiet now, save for the distant hum of the air conditioning and the soft clatter of cleanup crews tending to the remnants of what had once been a lavish celebration. The grand ballroom, which earlier had overflowed with laughter, music, and the sharp notes of champagne glasses, now felt hollow, almost solemn. Broken stems and scattered petals covered the marble floor like a mosaic of chaos, a visual reminder that pride and arrogance cannot survive truth. Nia and I walked slowly down the hall, her hand still resting in mine. She had changed tonight. Not just in demeanor, but in essence. The child who once worried about appearances had grown into a woman who could discern truth from facade. And though the weight of the evening pressed on her shoulders, there was a newfound clarity in her posture, a sense of purpose shining in her eyes. "You know, Dad," she said softly, almost as if speaking to herself, "I thought I understood life, but I didn't. I thought wealth and appearances mattered. I thought status was everything. But tonight I saw what really matters." I gave her a measured look, the corners of my mouth lifting just slightly. "And what is that, Naya?" "Respect," she whispered. "Integrity, honesty, courage." "Exactly," I said. "Those are the pillars that define a person, not the clothes they wear, the cars they drive, or the parties they throw." Preston failed because he lacked all three. You succeeded tonight, not because of victory over him, but because you recognized the value of truth. We paused at the doors leading to the main entrance. Outside, the valet was organizing vehicles, and the last few guests trickled out, still whispering, still processing what had occurred. Preston Sterling, the man who had once tried to humiliate me in front of the CEO, was now being escorted away, his face red with shame, his arrogance evaporated like mist in the morning sun. Henderson joined us quietly. He had been our silent guardian throughout the chaos, ensuring the integrity of both the event and the company. "Sir," he said, "everything is under control now. Preston has been removed and his influence within the company is effectively nullified. His career is over. Your family is safe from his lies and manipulation." I nodded, appreciating the gravity of his words. "Thank you, Henderson. You've done more than I could ask tonight. Your loyalty and judgment have always been exemplary. Tonight proves once again why I chose you to lead King Logistics in my absence." Henderson bowed his head slightly. "It has been an honor, sir." Naya took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Dad, what happens now? With the wedding, with Preston, with everything?" I considered her question carefully. Every choice tonight had consequences, and now it was time to guide her through the aftermath. Tonight was not the end, Nia. It was a revelation. You have seen the consequences of deception and arrogance firsthand. Preston is gone, and his lies have been exposed. But your life, your future is still in your hands. You can choose who to trust, who to love, and how to live with integrity. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were not tears of fear or shame. They were tears of awakening. I want to start over. I want to rebuild, but I don't want to make the same mistakes." "You won't," I assured her, "because tonight you've learned what truly matters. Never forget it, and never let appearances blind you to character. That lesson will guide you further than any wealth or status ever could." We continued walking, leaving the ballroom and the echoes of chaos behind. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of the city and the faint aroma of flowers still clinging stubbornly to the wind. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel the weight of what had transpired. Preston's arrogance, Nia's awakening, the guest's astonishment. It all coalesced into a single truth. Justice does not always require vengeance. Sometimes the truth alone is enough. The next morning, news of the wedding debacle spread like wildfire. Social media exploded with videos, photos, and first-hand accounts of the event. Headlines ranged from scandalous to awe-inspiring. Billionaire founder silences, arrogant groom at daughter's wedding, humiliation or justice, the Sterling King wedding fallout. From mothballs to majesty, Reginald King stuns guests. Nia read the headlines quietly, a mixture of embarrassment and empowerment washing over her. People are talking about this everywhere, she murmured. Do you think it will affect me? Not in the way you fear, I replied. People will always judge, but those who matter, friends, colleagues, those who care about character, they'll see the truth. You'll be respected for handling this with grace, not for the scandal itself. Over the following weeks, the fallout continued. Preston attempted to spin his narrative, but few believed him. His reputation, built entirely on falsehoods and bluster, crumbled rapidly. Within days, he found doors closed to him that had once been open, job offers rescinded, and social circles abandoned. The man who once strutted confidently through life was now a cautionary tale. A stark reminder that arrogance and deceit inevitably carry consequences. Meanwhile, Nia began to rebuild her life with a renewed sense of purpose. She sought counseling, reflecting on her choices, and began surrounding herself with people of integrity. Her friendships strengthened, and she cultivated relationships with individuals who valued honesty, loyalty, and respect. For the first time, she understood that true happiness was not dependent on wealth or appearances, but on authenticity and trust. For my part, I returned to my quiet life with a sense of fulfillment. The cabin by the lake, the rusted Ford truck, and the long hours spent fishing no longer felt like isolation or a retreat. They were my sanctuary, a place where clarity, wisdom, and peace could flourish. The world outside still needed to recognize me for who I truly was, and that was fine. I had made my mark in more ways than a Preston could ever comprehend. Henderson remained a loyal ally, managing King Logistics with the same competence and vision I had instilled decades ago. The company continued to thrive, its foundation stronger than ever, built on principles of integrity and diligence. And though I no longer sought the spotlight, I knew that the legacy of King Logistics and my guidance would endure long after my presence faded. One evening, months after the fateful wedding, Nia visited me at the cabin. She stood by the dock, gazing at the water, the sunlight catching her hair like threads of gold. She turned to me, a smile breaking across her face, a smile born of clarity, growth, and resilience. "Dad," she said softly, "I've been thinking about everything that happened, about Preston, about the wedding, about life. I want to thank you, not just for saving me from him, but for teaching me what really matters, for showing me that character outweighs wealth, that truth outweighs appearances." I placed a hand gently on her shoulder, feeling the warmth of her gratitude. "You've learned well, Nia. That is all a father can hope for, that his children carry wisdom forward, stronger than any fortune or title." She smiled again, this time with confidence. "I promise I won't forget. I'll make choices based on truth and respect, and I'll live a life I can be proud of, not just one that looks good on paper." And in that moment, I knew that the lessons of the wedding, the downfall of arrogance, the revelation of truth, and the awakening of my daughter had fulfilled their purpose. The storm had passed, but the wisdom endured. Reginald King, once underestimated and dismissed, had revealed not only his own enduring strength, but also the enduring truth, that life's greatest victories are not those marked by wealth, status, or applause, but by the clarity, integrity, and courage to stand firm in the face of deception. As the sun set over the lake, casting long shadows across the water, I felt a rare sense of peace. The past had been reconciled, the lessons had been learned, and the future, bright, honest, and free from pretense, stretched endlessly before us. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to simply smile, knowing that the legacy of truth, justice, and integrity would continue. Through my daughter, through the company, and through the memory of a night when arrogance met reality and reality triumphed.